It was dusty, desolate, and backwards, till the Jews came and made the desert bloom. While I was in college in the US, this was one of many statements said to my face, and it reflected a narrative so far removed from the one I grew up knowing. As a token Palestinian, pushing back on such a narrative felt like a continuous, monumental task. Of course, there were books with text and photography to prove the existence of a multifaceted Palestinian society, but in terms of accessibility, not much beyond that. Mind you, the internet was just starting back then. Our guest today has used her artistic talent and technical skill to embellish nostalgic prints of pre-1948 Palestine with paint, gold leaf, and thread. Orange pickers, olive harvesters, fishermen, travelers, market-goers, and brides all come alive. And in this way, she has reclaimed the narrative. Dana Barqawi is a multidisciplinary artist and urban planner based in Amman, Jordan. She creates politically and socially engaged art that challenges colonial narratives and explores indigenous identities and aspects of womanhood and community. Dana has participated in various international exhibitions and been published in several magazines. This episode was recorded on the 1st of October, 2024. I'm your host, Afaf Shawabibi, and you're listening to Tarwida. Thank you for joining us today, Dana.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Dana, before we delve into your amazing artwork, it's worth talking about your work in urban planning, because it seems that has informed the messages and the themes that you cover.
So I am originally an architect and urban planner. And during my studies, there was a lot of political studies and social studies. I did international cooperation and emergency architecture. And that definitely opened my eyes onto a new way of seeing things and how things operate in the world that we live in. It really raised a lot of questions for me. So Initially, I started writing on certain topics. So I started writing articles and just publishing them on my personal page. And they did get a lot of interaction. And then I found myself naturally moving towards art as a means to express and to communicate. So this is why my work, it revolves a lot about political topics, social concepts, identity concepts, and history and narratives. I think all of these are extremely interconnected, and understanding one means that everything else will also come into the conversation at some point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so you grew up surrounded by creative women who sewed and painted and made art. Other than helping you develop an eye for detail, which is clearly reflected in your intricate work, what did you learn from them? Techniques, let's say.
So my mother always embroidered. My grandmothers, both of them, they painted. My aunt was a professional painter. So it was just the way that they dealt with different materials, the way that they dealt with thread, with paper, with paint, watercolor, acrylics, oils. I think just being exposed to that maybe has made me more flexible with using these materials, because I use mixed media in my work. I use acrylics, oils, thread, so I embroider paper or canvas. So I think I am become more open with using different materials and maybe different ways of using art and looking at art.
So you learned, you were exposed to different techniques from them, but you ended up, taking these various techniques, but then making them your own because you combine them. So whereas, somebody is specialized in sewing or another person is specialized in painting or calligraphy, you are actually combining all of these, let's say, traditional techniques. And your work feels very unique, very fresh and new.
Thank you.
How do you come up with your ideas? And also, just to connect that, do you come up with each element alone or all together when you're using these materials?
So my work is very layered. The first layer in my work would be the photograph. I work with photographs, black and white photographs, and this has always been the base for my work. And then I add to it acrylics, any kind of paint, acrylics, oils, pastels, and then there is thread and embroidery and gold leafing. How I choose to use these materials really depends on the concept of the artwork itself and what I plan to communicate and what I wanted to deliver as a message to the viewer. So it really depends. It differs from one artwork to another. Maybe with embroidery, I want to focus more on the dress or the tobe that the woman in the photograph is wearing. So it really depends on the artwork itself.
And okay, let's talk about the creative process, because your work is, as I said, very intricate, and it looks like it needs a lot of work. And I've heard from someone who's visited your studio that you work on more than one piece at the same time, and that it therefore takes you a long time to do to complete one piece. Tell us more about that.
So it is a process in how I start working on any series or a collection of artworks, and even the artwork itself. And the process, basically, it starts with research on the topic itself and what the idea is that I want to communicate. And then I start with visualizing my ideas in paint, basically on canvas or on paper. So I do get stuck sometimes with in certain artworks where it just stops and there is more that I want to say, but I'm not sure how, or even sometimes I'm not sure what it is that I want to say. So I just leave that artwork and then I go to the next one and I start a new piece on a new topic. And then sometimes it happens that the two artworks overlap in certain concepts, they connect in certain ideas, and then I get more inspiration to finish the previous artwork. So this is how I work with it. I work with multiple artworks, and yes, they do take a lot of time because I'm very detail oriented. So focusing on the little details, it just takes more time than expected, even usually. And I'm also working currently with larger size artworks. So this takes even more time.
Sure. Yeah, and it shows that it's extremely detailed, and the result is just really stunning.
Thank you.
In your 2018 collection called A Land Without a People, so you used photographs of Palestinian people pre-1948 in their daily activities. And through this, you negated the false Zionist colonial claim that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. Basically, you reclaim the narrative. Let's just talk about the prints. Where did you find them? Were there any copyright issues?
So those photographs that I've used, I've actually found at the archive of the Library of Congress in Washington. And they are all photographs of the ones that I selected were, as you said, of Palestinians before 1948. When it comes to copyright issues, so these were published by the library online for public use. So what they did is that at some point they put a part of their archive online for public use. So there are no copyright issues. But I would also still sometimes ask the question as to what constitutes this as right or wrong, because these photographs were initially taken in a colonial context.
Mm-hmm.
They were taken by Western white men who came to the land, and they took photographs of these people with very little attention to what their names are, what they do, who these people are. So there's really very little information on who the people in these photographs are. And what I try to do in my work is to give autonomy to those people in the photographs, and insert the indigenous into these colonial photographs, in a sense. So when it comes to right and wrong and copyrights, it becomes, for me, questionable as to really what is right or wrong when it comes to that.
You're using these prints to bring back to life these scenes of Palestinians working, living, interacting, and creating. And you talked about the layering of your work, and it almost looks like it's a layering of memories, which is really, really beautiful. Was there a favorite image for you, or one that you think best symbolizes Palestine?
I do get asked this question a lot. And for me, the answer would be they're really all different. Maybe I would say that I resonate a lot with photographs of women and the photographs of mothers. I have a couple of artworks that focus on motherhood, probably around 3 of them. And those really bring a lot of emotion because they are so... they're so deep in meaning, in connecting motherhood to the land and how we used to mother through our connection to the land. We tend to the land and we grow the land, and whatever the land gives us, we feed our children and our loved ones. And this cycle of nurture, I think, is very beautiful and very profound. And it's also very threatening to the colonizer. The concept of motherhood is actually, of indigenous motherhood, is actually very threatening to the colonizer. And it really, I resonate with it a lot. So I would say that.
One of the pieces called Carmel and Haifa, which is, you see a great dragnet of fishes showing men hauling in the nets. This was taken approximately between 1920 and 1933. I'm not sure you know this, but there's a YouTuber called Brianna Elise who sews, and she actually used the pattern from this painting to create a corset as a tribute to Palestine during the genocide.
Oh, wow.
You didn't know this, did you?
I didn't know about this.
It's beautiful because you're using the prints to bring back, in a way, to revive Palestinian life. And then the pattern that you added to those prints became a part of someone else's work. It's just a beautiful...
That really makes me happy, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about some of the recurrent themes in your work. You've mentioned motherhood. What other themes are there?
So the main theme would be colonialism. And under it would be motherhood, theme of the land and connection to the land. In my new series that I'm working on currently, I'm focusing also a lot on themes of imperialism and war, and just questioning all of these narratives and these concepts in my work.
So we'll talk about your current project next, but I just want to ask you, what are some of the symbols or symbolism that we can see related to these themes?
So I use a lot of symbolism for warplanes in my work. This symbolizes war. I use a lot of flowers also. So the flowers in my work, they do have an aesthetic visual sense to them. So most of the times, the flowers that I use come from local knowledge of plants. So flowers, herbal medicine, food that is a part of how we used to live. So I use a lot of these plants in my work, but also I use flowers in my work as a way to represent the way that society glazes over humanity's mistakes and humanity's errors. And we just look the other way to make ourselves feel better or to just not have to really deal with it. So it's just the way that society glazes over our mistakes. So I do use that also a lot in my work. My work has a lot of layers. And initially, when you look at it, it has an aesthetic feel. And this is what I use to attract the viewer to my work. But below these layers, below the aesthetic layer, there is always usually a darker message or more of a political message and a historical narrative that I think is very crucial to talk about or to address.
And so now with your current project, Re-Narrate, can you tell us a bit more about this project?
So I have been working with this project for the past 2 years almost. It's titled Re-Narrate, in Arabic, إعادة سرد. And the idea of it is to re-narrate colonial narratives in the region. So the collection goes into Palestine and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt and Iraq. And basically, each artwork tries to address a colonial narrative that has been imposed on us one way or another, through history, through modern media, through the press and the news. And we really never questioned any of these narratives. We just took them in and we moved on with our lives. But they do hugely affect our identity, the way we see ourselves. And I believe that history is very important for us to understand and question, because eventually it is written by the most powerful. And there are usually so many different sides to any historical narrative. And once we start questioning these and understanding them and trying to see them in our own way instead of seeing them through the white man's gaze, this is where we start deconstructing identity, ideas, and concepts that were imposed on us and forming our own, essentially.
So there is one painting, two paintings called Chapter 3, She Refused His White Man's Burden. These are pretty large, if I'm correct. I saw in a post you standing next to them. They're quite large. Am I right?
Yeah, they are.
So tell us about these two, because this refers to, the white man and their role in colonialism.
So those two are the largest artworks I have worked on so far, the largest ones I've produced so far. And they're on Egypt. They're focused on the revolution in Egypt in 1919 against the British mandate at the time. And why this revolution was so interesting for me is because it was a revolution by the people. So it was led by women, workers, students, men of religion. Everyone came together as one against the British mandate at the time. And there were so many layers to this revolution that I think it was beautiful. One layer would be basically I focused on Sayyid Darwish. Sayyid Darwish, he created a musical revolution during that time. And interestingly, he was a construction worker. And then he moved to music, and he wrote songs and made music that spoke against the British colonizer at the time, but it was in Arabic. And everyone sang these songs, everyone of the society, of the Egyptian society at the time, they sang these songs and without the colonizer actually understanding what these were about. And this, I think, gave a lot of motivation for the people and a lot of empowerment to want to actually stand together against the colonizer. So I do believe that music was a tool at the time a beautiful tool to bring people together against the colonizers. So there's a lot of symbolism in these works to the revolution, to local Egyptian culture and landscape, and to the people, as well as to the colonizer.
Mm-hmm. And the painting, It Takes a Village, which is about indigenous motherhood and colonialism. Is that so far the latest? Is there anything more in the collection that's been done?
So this is the last one that I've published online of this series. And there are other artworks that are part of this collection. So the collection is 10 pieces, and I think I've only put online around 4. It Takes a Village is part of the new series. And actually, It Takes a Village, it resonated a lot with me at the time. I published it during the events that are happening in Gaza. I saw a lot of mothers who were losing a lot, losing children, losing land, losing husbands, losing communities. And this artwork just, it resonated with that, even though I started working on it actually many months before the 7th of October. But I just felt it was the time to share it at the time. So
you started working on it before the 7th of October, but you continued and finished it around when?
So I started it around, I would say, February, March, and it finished around November, December.
So was there a change in the piece? I mean, did it take a different turn? Were there different elements added as a result of the events that were happening?
So this does happen actually with a couple of pieces that I'm working with. For example, now there are 2 pieces that I'm working with. One is focused more on the land, and the other one is focused on, it's about Lebanon. And both of them I have started working with also before the 7th of October. And they have changed, not changed, so it's not as much as changed, but it's just the ideas became more vivid and became stronger with everything that has happened in the world. Because since the 7th of October, so many things have come out as what they truly are. The truth has become more clear. It has become more loud. And so many things and so many people have appeared to what they truly are, and so many things in the world have appeared to how they truly work and function. And this definitely has impacted, has had an effect on these 2 artworks.
Were you able to continue your work? Was there a time when you were like, things just paused and stopped, or were you able to just continue?
I definitely stopped for months, because what happened is a shock to everyone. And it was very shocking in the sense of questioning what you do and how does anything you do contribute to humanity and to the planet and to the world and to people and to all of this injustice. Just a lot of questions and a lot of reflections on what matters. Does it really matter? Does what I do matter? Does what anyone does matter? But it does. It does. I think that every little thing anyone does in that sense matter, as long as it is authentic and as long as it aligns with the truth. I feel that everything matters. Little seeds definitely grow into something stronger. So yes, and in the end, what I do and the art that I do, I use it as a tool. It's a tool to talk about things that matter, to have people starting to question things that matter. And I feel that if I can impact one person or impact the way one human sees things, that alone will have a butterfly effect in the future, and just a ripple effect that will create something bigger in the future. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely, this was one of the things we at Tarwida for the podcast were thinking about is, is this a time to launch a podcast? But we really do feel that it's very important for artists like yourself to be highlighted so that we can, again, going back to the reclaiming the narrative and show not just the world, but more importantly, maybe us as global Palestinians, global people in global Palestine, who we are and what richness we have as a culture and as artists. So just going back to re-narrate, can you tell us, are there any additional themes that are going to be highlighted? Because the collection is still being worked on. So what else can we expect to see?
With this collection, the main theme is obviously colonialism, and it just branches out into all aspects of colonialism. So I do work with concepts of imperialism, capitalism, the land and the borders, and how these borders were drawn and who decided to create these nations. So yeah, it mainly focuses on the colonial entity, but it focuses on the idea that colonization is not just happening in Palestine. We might say that the headquarters are in Palestine, but it's really everyone else is colonized. And that's why I am discussing all of these countries, because we all suffer from the same oppressive empire that is controlling the whole world. One of my artworks is actually focused on Black African Americans. And it is very important for the colonizer to separate the struggles. So the Blacks have their own struggle, the Palestinians have their own struggle, indigenous people anywhere else, they have their own struggle. So everyone's struggle is separate, but in reality, it's not. The struggle is really one, and it's against one enemy, the same enemy, because the same tactics that are used to oppress Black Africans in America are the same tactics that are used to oppress Palestinians in Palestine and people in Syria and people in Lebanon and everywhere else. So it's really, we are all fighting against one system, and this is actually the main focus also of this collection.
And one art form that's played a very important role in in many different national struggles, but particularly the Palestinian one, is the poster. You have posters that you've done, correct? Can you tell us a bit about those? Were they commissioned for something, or was it just something you chose to do?
So those posters, I did a series of 5 digital posters, and those posters were part of the first collection that I worked on. So the collection basically had pieces, original artworks that were hand-painted and embroidered, and the other part of it was digital posters. Posters for me are very interesting because they have always been a very powerful tool in mobilizing people and mobilizing groups and communities in a positive or in a negative way. So people in power always used posters either for propaganda or for creating motions of resistance, so it was always used. And I think it's because it's easy for people to understand, no matter what your background is. If you're an artist, if you're a farmer, if you're an architect or a doctor, or you would understand a poster. It's simple, it's direct, it's flashy, and it's colorful, and it's just powerful, and it does move people. So yes, posters have always been a huge part of all movements around the world and throughout history.
One of your posters, not from your website, is featured in the Palestine Poster Project's archives by Dan Walsh. Tell us more about this poster?
So this poster was created during the aggression on Gaza a couple of years ago. And I created this poster as part of a protest against everything that was happening. And it was also focused on the idea that there is no such thing as a two-state solution. Palestine is all of Palestine, the whole land, from river to the sea. And this was the idea of the poster. And I created it, and it was, at the time, it still is actually, it was open for download by anyone, because people at the time were protesting, and they were going out on protests in mass all around the world, and everyone was holding up posters, and they wanted more slogans and posters and visuals that they could use and carry in these protests. And I did actually get, people were sending me photographs of them carrying them in protests around the world. And yeah, that was the idea of this one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nice. Your work in general very much lends itself to print. I can see it being used for even book cover illustrations. I'm not sure if anyone's ever approached you for that, but I've heard it's even more beautiful in real life. So I'd really love to see it.
Thank you.
But you do sell prints of your paintings. Can you tell us about the choice to do that? People can go on your website and request to buy a print.
So yeah, I do produce prints of my artwork. So there is the original artwork, and there are prints of it in different formats and different sizes. And the idea is that, for me, I care that my work reaches as many people as possible. And it's important for me that anyone who resonates with my work can have it, or can have parts of the artworks. And so this is why the prints are available. They're available in different formats and sizes and prices that people can afford and collect. For me, art, I don't want to have it as something that is exclusive. If I say that it's a tool for myself to communicate and to discuss and talk to people, then it should be available to people, and people should be able to have access to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One thing I also noticed on your website, which I encourage people to go and check out, you explain each piece. When a person clicks on the work, there is an explanation in English and in Arabic, talking about the meaning of the piece, the themes, of course, the materials. And not a lot of artists do that. It really helps the viewer appreciate and understand the work. I'm speaking from experience. My mother's a painter, and for so many years, her paintings, which are expressionist, I would look at them and admire them, but I didn't really understand what they are about until she did an exhibition last spring, and she took us on a tour and explained each and every one, and it was like this beautiful, epiphany. So it's I think that you're really doing your admirers a service by explaining the work to them. But what made you decide to do that?
So I start all of the texts, and the explanation is actually part of the artwork. I start all of my series and collections and works with a text. So with research and a text. And I write the text, and then I visualize this text into an artwork. And I visualize it in a way that would invoke emotion in people and would trigger them to question and want to talk and want to discuss. So the text is actually a base for the artwork, and how it starts and how it progresses. And it does change sometimes also with the artwork. So during the painting process, some ideas might come up that are not written in the initial text. And so I have to go back to the text and re-edit and modify until I reached the final text, basically. And so this is why I share it with the artworks. I think it's important to share it and for people to understand what I'm talking about. And this is the idea.
I might have forgotten to ask you, but some of your earlier works were based on poetry. I mean, you would visualize poems. Am I right?
Yeah. So a couple of artworks, actually, I worked with the poetry of Samih al-Qasim. He's a Palestinian poet. His poetry is beautiful. The words, it's just very moving and it's very powerful. And just reading it just really brings out a lot of emotion, and it moved me so much. And I used his work to visualize a couple of artworks, and I still do. I still do select some sentences from his poetry and phrases. It is very powerful. Actually, in the recent artwork that I'm working on, the one that is focusing on Black African Americans and oppression, there's a lot of reference to Samih al-Qasim because ironically and very interestingly, the Black Panthers, some of the men in the Black Panthers party were very inspired by Samih al-Qasim's poetry. And this connection, I thought was very powerful, and it is reflected in that artwork.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Actually, the Black Panther member his name is George Jackson, and he was assassinated in American prison. And in his prison cell, they found a lot of Samih al-Qasim's poetry that he read and kept on writing, and it inspired him. And even after he died, they didn't know that these were poems by a Palestinian poet, Samih al-Qasim. So at the time, these poetries were published under his name, under George Jackson's name, until after some time, they found out that this was originally a Palestinian poet. And it's just this inspiration between the fights and the struggles. Just shows more and more that really the struggle is one.
Yeah. On your website, your space, which you call the workshop, you say that you're open to other artists and creatives to come, and if they want to just use this space. Have people actually done that?
Yes. So I actually, initially when I chose this space, I wanted to have a large space that I can work in, where I can spread myself and work on larger sizes of artworks and produce them. But I also was very interested in collaborating with other artists or other people in the field who might share similar ideas, similar approaches to their work. And so it is open to that. And I've actually exhibited once for a local artist. He's an emerging artist, and his work is just very interesting. So he did take the space for around a month, where he exhibited all of his paintings and his work. So it was more of an exhibition space. And in other times, art teachers would bring their students to my space, and where they would discuss different artworks or just work with the space. So yeah, it has been open, and it's interesting for me to see who would be interested in this space. So sometimes it's students, sometimes it's university students or school, or just different artists who want to come into the space. So yeah, it's still not very defined as to what this space actually is, but I'm keeping it flexible at the time, and it's just fluid and open. And maybe with time, it will form a more solid identity.
Nice. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you a question that we're asking all our guests, because, we like to, again, shed light on the rich artistic and cultural heritage that we have. Who would you suggest we invite to this podcast next?
Would I suggest? Many people are actually interesting to talk to. I know that there is a local artist. His workshop is also actually very close to mine. His name is Brahim Jawabre. He is a Palestinian artist, and his work is very interesting. The medium that he works with fabrics, a lot. So it's just fabric most of the times. He does paint. He has some paintings, but his most interesting works are fabrics. So Brahim Jawabri is one interesting artist that now comes to mind. Would be interesting to talk to.
Anyone that's not a visual artist?
Anyone that's not a visual artist. There is actually a very interesting project happening here in Amman. I don't know if maybe you might be aware of it. It's called Al Baraka Wheat. It initially started as a project to reclaim the narrative of food and planting wheat. So now what they're doing is they're trying to empower local farmers to grow wheat, and they're actually doing a very good job at it with producing the flour and the bread and working with local bakeries. And it's really, what I think is very interesting about it and very beautiful is that many people are feeling very empowered by this project. Like we're eating wheat that is grown by local farmers, grown in our land, and basically boycotting anything that is coming from outside. It's a beautiful project, I think.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
It is very
that.
interesting.
Well, Dana, we're coming to the end of our time together, and we can't wait to see your upcoming artworks, and I would love to see your art in person. So I hope to do that one day soon.
Inshallah, I'll keep you posted. And this was really nice. Such a nice talk. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you've shared, your time, your insight, your experience. I mean, you're still relatively young, but you have such a long road ahead of you, and we can't wait to see how you and your work develop. So,
Inshallah.
Best of luck to you. Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Afa.
Thank you for listening to Tarwida, a podcast dedicated to bringing you the best of Palestinian arts and culture. For more information, please follow us on social media, and don't forget to subscribe. Salam.